Hi, I'm Mina.
And I'm Yules.
Thanks for tuning in to Artificially Informed.
Right now, as you are listening to this, you are sitting on a planet that is actively vibrating with the stress of a trillion-dollar intelligence boom.
Yeah, and you are also floating through a universe so unimaginably violent that stars exploding, 10 billion years ago are still helping us solve cosmic crimes today.
Exactly. And simultaneously, the invisible systems that you completely rely on, the ones that keep your lights on, your grocery store shelves stocked, and your borders secure, they are buckling under extreme, unprecedented pressure.
Right.
So welcome to the deep dive.
We are taking a massive stack of current events today, and really the through line connecting all of them is friction.
Friction, I like that.
Right, we are looking at how deeply interconnected systems behave when you push them past their engineered limits. So we have data spanning from the farthest reaches of observable space down to the granular level of physical labor strikes in the American Midwest and straight into the geopolitical powder keg of the Middle East.
It's a lot to cover.
Yeah, it is. But our mission today is to dissect the mechanics of this friction. We need to understand not just what is breaking down, but the underlying physics, the economics, and honestly the psychology of why it is breaking.
And I want you to keep that idea of friction in mind as we navigate this because it really applies to everything we touch today. And I promise, while the scale of this breakdown sounds incredibly heavy, we are also going to uncover some profoundly bizarre realities along the way.
Oh, absolutely.
We are talking about the chemical signature of newly discovered exoplanets that literally smell like rotten eggs.
Yeah, that's a fun one.
And we even have the reigning British monarch spinning DJ tracks in a nightclub to cope with the zeitgeist. So there's a balance. But to understand the chaos happening down here on Earth, I always find it really helpful to look up first.
Totally agree.
We have to map the massive, unstoppable forces of nature and the cosmos before we can really understand our own human-made systems. So let's start with the National Aeronautics and Space Administration.
Right, NASA.
Yeah, NASA just released the first light images from Sparks.
Right, which stands for the Star Planet Activity Research CubeSat.
A CubeSat.
Yeah, and this is a fascinating mission because of the sheer asymmetry between the size of the tool and the massive scale of the question it's asking.
Because it's tiny, right.
Extremely small. We are talking about a satellite roughly the size of a standard cereal box.
Wow.
Yeah, it is built on the CubeSat standard, which are these modular 10-centimeter cubes that have completely democratized access to space. And it recently hitched a ride into low Earth orbit on a SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket.
And what's it actually looking for up there?
Well, its entire dedicated mission is to monitor low-mass stars, specifically M-dwarf stars, in ultraviolet light.
Okay, so these M dwarfs, those are the red dwarfs, right? The
Yeah.
ones that make up something like, 70% of all the stars in our Milky Way galaxy?
Yeah, they are everywhere.
So if we are looking for habitable planets, looking at the most common stars in the neighborhood just makes mathematical sense.
It makes perfect mathematical sense, but it introduces a severe astrophysical problem.
Which is?
Well, M-dwarfs are incredibly long-lived. They burn for trillions of years, which theoretically gives life plenty of time to evolve. However, they also violently active.
Active how?
Because of their internal convection dynamics, their magnetic fields get incredibly twisted and tangled up, and when those magnetic field lines finally snap and realign, a process we call magnetic reconnection, they release gargantuan flares of ultraviolet radiation.
Oh, wow. So think about what a bad sunburn feels like to you on a summer day. Now multiply that radiation by several million.
Right. It's devastating.
These stellar tantrums are so violent they can literally physically strip the atmosphere off of any planet unlucky enough to be orbiting in the habitable zone.
Yeah, the mechanism is called photolysis. The high-energy ultraviolet photons slam into the atmosphere of the exoplanet, and they carry enough energy to actually break the molecular bonds of water vapor, splitting it into hydrogen and oxygen.
And the hydrogen just floats away.
Exactly. The hydrogen, being so light, simply escapes into the vacuum of space. So over millions of years, the star effectively boils away the planet's oceans and atmosphere, leaving this barren, irradiated rock.
That's terrifying.
It is. But Sparks is up there right now, capturing these stars in near and far ultraviolet light acting as this cosmic forensic tool to help us calculate if life could ever survive the magnetic violence of our galaxy's most common stars.
It really changes the entire calculus of the search for extraterrestrial life, doesn't it? I mean, we might have billions of planets in the habitable zone where temperatures allow for liquid water, but if the local star is constantly sterilizing them with UV radiation, well, the universe becomes a much lonelier place.
Very much so.
And the environments we actually are finding are proving to be wildly hostile, too. I mean, look at the data that just came back from the James Webb Space Telescope, the JWST.
Yeah, that was a huge revelation this week.
They trained its massive golden mirrors on a newly discovered exoplanet, ran an atmospheric analysis, and found a staggering concentration of hydrogen sulfide.
Right, and the spectroscopy they use here is it's elegant in its physics.
How does that work, simply put?
So, when the exoplanet passes in front of its host star, the starlight filters through the planet's atmosphere before traveling across the galaxy to hit the JWST's sensors.
Okay.
And different chemical molecules absorb specific, unique wavelengths of light. By looking at the missing gaps in the light spectrum, scientists can read the chemical makeup of the atmosphere like a barcode.
That is wild.
Yeah, and the barcode for this specific exoplanet just screamed hydrogen sulfide.
I am just imagining the scientists in the control room realizing that they have spent $10 billion on the most sophisticated instrument in the history of human civilization, peered into the majestic depths of the cosmos, and discovered a world that essentially smells like a sulfur hot spring, or like a forgotten hard-boiled egg in the back of your refrigerator.
Yeah, it's not exactly a vacation destination. To human olfactory receptors, hydrogen sulfide is incredibly pungent.
And toxic, right.
Deeply toxic to carbon-based life as we know it. But its presence is a crucial data point for planetary geology. On Earth, hydrogen sulfide is primarily produced by volcanic activity or the anaerobic breakdown of organic matter.
So finding it on an exoplanet means what?
Well, finding it in such massive quantities suggests extreme geological friction. Perhaps a world completely covered in hyperactive volcanoes, constantly venting gas into a thick, suffocating atmosphere.
Man. So we are looking at a universe defined by violent expansion and geological chaos.
It's everywhere you look.
And that expansion itself is actually the subject of another major breakthrough this week. Researchers utilizing the Dark Energy Survey are actively analyzing the light from a very rare supernova.
Yes.
But the time frame here is what completely breaks the human brain. This explosion happened 10 billion years ago.
Right. They are looking at the remnants of a type ES supernova. In astrophysics, these are known as standard candles.
Standard candles, meaning what exactly?
It means that because this specific type of star always explodes with the exact same absolute brightness, scientists can calculate exactly how far away it is just by measuring how dim it appears from Earth. It is the ultimate cosmic yardstick.
Got it. So if you know exactly how bright a light bulb is and you see it from across a dark field, you can use the faintness of the light to calculate the distance to the person holding it.
Exactly. That's the perfect analogy.
But the light from this specific explosion has been traveling through the vacuum of space for 10 billion years. I mean, it detonated long before our solar system, our sun, or the Earth even existed.
Yeah, it's staggering. But the true value of this 10-billion-year-old light is how it helps us map dark energy.
Which is still a massive mystery.
It is. See, as the light traveled toward us over billions of years, the universe itself was expanding. This expansion physically stretches the light waves, shifting them toward the red end of the spectrum, a phenomenon called redshift.
Okay, I follow.
So by measuring the exact redshift of this ancient supernova, cosmologists can track the acceleration rate of the universe. It provides direct physical evidence of dark energy, which is this mysterious repulsive force that is actively stretching the fabric of space-time and pushing galaxies apart.
It's just so massive, and you hear about this extreme cosmic violence, stars ripping apart atmospheres, toxic volcanic worlds, dark energy tearing the fabric of reality. And there is a comforting temptation to look out your window and think, well, at least my neighborhood is stable.
Right.
But the reality is the exact same principles of friction and physical stress are playing out in our own atmosphere. Take the terrifying incident that just happened in Knoxville, Tennessee in the United States.
That was intense.
Yeah. Residents experienced a deafening percussive boom that visibly shook houses and just shattered the quiet. The immediate assumption for anyone living there was a massive earthquake or a localized explosion.
Naturally. And the United States Geological Survey, the USGS, immediately mobilized their sensor networks to track the epicenter.
And what did they find?
The data came back completely negative. There was zero tectonic movement. The continental plates had not shifted a millimeter.
So if the ground didn't move, how do you explain a shock wave that physically rattles the windows of an entire city?
The mechanism is a highly localized atmospheric anomaly known as explosive expansion. It is a very dramatic demonstration of thermal dynamics.
Oh, break that down for us.
Basically, when you have a massive, sudden shift in temperature, such as a pocket of freezing high-altitude air rapidly colliding with an unseasonably warm surface layer, the air mass, or the physical moisture within it, expands or contracts at an incredibly violent rate.
Wow. So the air itself gets so thermally stressed that it basically snaps.
Yes.
It is like taking a hot glass out of the dishwasher and immediately plunging it into freezing water. The glass shatters because the materials cannot handle the rapid temperature gradient.
That's exactly it. In Knoxville, the sky itself effectively shattered, creating an acoustic shock wave that perfectly mimicked the seismic event.
It really illustrates how fluid and volatile the systems around us truly are. And when that natural volatility intersects with human infrastructure, the results are immediate and physical. Look at the situation right now at the borders between South Africa and Mozambique.
Right, the flooding.
The Border Management Authority, the BMA, has been forced to completely suspend all operations at the Pafuri and Giriando ports of entry.
It's a complete shutdown. The Luvuvu River experienced such severe, rapid flooding that the water levels completely overwhelmed the physical infrastructure.
We are talking about critical bureaucratic and economic checkpoints just being submerged. They had to execute emergency evacuations of all personnel and operational vehicles just to prevent loss of life.
You have a hydromechanical failure, essentially erasing a geopolitical boundary. The sheer volume of water, moving with immense kinetic energy, just washed away the physical mechanisms we use to define sovereign nations. The bureaucracy of passports, customs, and international trade instantly yielded to fluid dynamics.
Think about the fragility of that for a moment. You know, we draw these hard lines on maps, we build customs houses, we deploy guards, and we pretend the system is absolute. But a heavy rain system upstream gathers enough kinetic energy, and suddenly the border simply ceases to function.
It's a very humbling reality check.
It really is. Nature's forces are constantly exposing the physical limits of our world, but humanity is currently running its own grand experiment in pushing systems to their breaking point. We are pushing the absolute limits of our technological and economic infrastructure.
Which brings us to the AI boom.
Yes, the transition from mapping the physical universe to mapping our new digital reality brings us face to face with the silicon gold rush that is expanding at a terrifying trillion-dollar pace.
And the scale of capital currently being injected into artificial intelligence infrastructure fundamentally defies historical comparison. Jensen Huang, the CEO of NVIDIA, has publicly projected a staggering $1 trillion in revenue stemming from their new Blackwell and Vera Rubin AI chips by the year 2027.
Let's contextualize $1 trillion for a second. If NVIDIA hits that revenue target, their chip sales alone will generate more wealth than the entire gross domestic product of countries like Switzerland, Saudi Arabia, or the Netherlands.
Yeah.
We are not talking about software subscriptions here. We are talking about physical hardware.
And the hardware is the bottleneck of the entire AI revolution. The Blackwell and Vera Rubin architectures are marvels of nanoscale engineering.
How so?
They involve stacking silicon dies to maximize transistor density and engineering massive memory bandwidth so these chips can process the billions of parameters required by large language models simultaneously. And companies are not just buying a few of these.
No, they're buying them in bulk.
Right. Hyperscalers like Microsoft, Google, and Meta are buying them by the hundreds of thousands to build massive server farms.
And the halo effect of this infrastructure build-out is creating spontaneous wealth across the entire tech sector. I mean, look at Nibius, which is a cloud computing firm. They watched their stock price detonate, popping 14% in a single trading session.
Just off a single announcement.
Right. The catalyst was their announcement of a $27 billion infrastructure deal with Meta to provide full-stack, intelligent cloud solutions.
$27 billion allocated simply to build the physical environment for AI to operate. This involves acquiring the real estate, pouring the concrete for the data centers, installing the industrial cooling systems.
Because these chips get incredibly hot.
Exactly. They need massive cooling just to keep the NVIDIA chips from melting themselves into slag. And then laying the fiber optic interconnects. It is literally the plumbing of the new digital economy.
But the plumbing is leaking out into the physical world now. This intelligence is not staying confined to air-conditioned server racks. Uber and NVIDIA have formalized a partnership to launch a massive robotaxi rollout across 28 major cities, with deployment targeting 2027.
Right.
The objective is the total removal of the human driver from the urban transportation matrix.
And the engineering challenge here relies on sensor fusion. The vehicles must constantly ingest data from LiDAR, which uses lasers to build a 3D map of the surroundings, coupled with radar for velocity tracking and optical cameras for reading signs and signals.
So it's taking in a massive amount of data every second.
Exactly. And the onboard NVIDIA chips then run inferencing algorithms in real time to decide whether to brake, steer, or accelerate.
I have to say, I am extremely skeptical about the timeline and reality of deploying this in 28 distinct urban environments in just a few years.
That's a very valid skepticism.
Because anyone who drives in a major city knows that the physical street is governed by chaos, not logic.
Yeah.
You have a pedestrian who steps off a curb while staring at a smartphone. You have a delivery cyclist swerving across 3 lanes of traffic in the rain. You have a construction worker making ambiguous hand gestures.
You are describing what engineers call the long tail of edge cases. Algorithmic driving systems are exceptionally good at handling 99% of driving tasks, staying in the lane, stopping at a red light. But achieving that final fraction of a percent, the 99.999% reliability required to prevent fatalities when human chaos intersects with the vehicle, is exponentially more difficult.
Because humans are unpredictable.
Exactly. The algorithms must predict human irrationality, which is mathematically agonizing.
But the ambition to automate away human irrationality is not stopping at the steering wheel. The government of Hong Kong is officially launching the world's first governed AI agent network.
Yes.
By 2027, their blueprint mandates that AI will actively manage over 200 different public services.
They are essentially applying large language models and decision tree algorithms to civic bureaucracy. Tasks like processing building permits, managing public transit scheduling, allocating social services, and auditing tax returns will be handled by autonomous agents.
And honestly, when you hand the keys of civic life over to an algorithm, you are trading human discretion for mathematical efficiency.
There's definitely a trade-off.
If a citizen has a highly nuanced, complicated tax problem that requires empathy and context to resolve, an AI agent operating on strict parameters will likely just output a denial. We are streamlining the state, but we risk losing the humanity of governance.
And beyond the philosophical cost, the sheer physical cost of running all this logic is breaking the power grid.
Oh, the electricity demands are insane?
The thermodynamics of the AI boom are becoming the primary limiting factor. A standard data center running traditional cloud applications might require a few dozen megawatts of power. A modern AI training cluster requires hundreds of megawatts.
Just massive amounts of energy.
The graphics processing units run so hot and draw so much electricity that they are overwhelming local grid infrastructure.
Which is actually birthing an entirely new sub-industry. A company called NIV AI just exited stealth mode, armed with $12 million in seed funding. And they aren't building AI models. Their entire business model is simply managing the massive, violent power surges that these GPU clusters demand from the electrical grid.
Because grid inertia is a very delicate balance. If a massive data center suddenly demands a huge spike in electricity to train a new model, it can literally cause brownouts for the surrounding community.
Wow.
So companies like NIV AI are building software to throttle and manage that electrical draw in real time. And alongside the physical power security, the cybersecurity of these autonomous systems is paramount.
Right. Which is why NVIDIA is launching NemoClaw.
Yes, NemoClaw, which integrates with their OpenShell safety runtime.
And I want to break down what those terms actually mean for you listening. When we talk about autonomous AI agents, we are talking about programs that are given a goal like audit these financial records and then allowed to execute steps on their own without human prompts.
Right, they act independently.
So NemoClaw and OpenShell act as the guardrails. They are the security protocols designed to ensure these agents don't hallucinate a command, go rogue, or get hijacked by a malicious hacker to, say, delete a city's public transit schedule.
We are spending billions of dollars to power the intelligence, and billions more to build digital cages to contain it. But really, the most profound friction point generated by this silicon gold rush is the impact on the foundational human workforce.
Yes.
The macroeconomic decoupling of corporate productivity from human labor is happening right now in real time.
Senator Elizabeth Warren is currently applying intense political pressure, demanding answers from major corporations, including Meta Amazon, Target, and UPS. She is pointing to a glaring paradox. These massive entities are conducting rolling, mass layoffs of their human workforce, citing efficiency and automation, while simultaneously reaping the benefits of massive, taxpayer-funded corporate tax incentives.
And to impartially look at the structural design here, many of these corporate tax incentives originated in the industrial era.
Yeah.
The social contract was essentially the government gets the corporation a tax break, and in return, the corporation uses that capital to build a factory and hire thousands of local workers, enriching the tax state.
It was a reciprocal arrangement.
But Senator Warren is highlighting that in the digital era, corporations use those tax breaks to buy NVIDIA servers and automate the jobs away. The taxpayer is effectively subsidizing the destruction of their own livelihood.
It forces us to ask a deeply uncomfortable question about the end game of our economy. I mean, if artificial intelligence makes a logistics company vastly more efficient and exponentially more profitable, but they lay off 20% of their workforce to achieve it, where does that prosperity actually go?
That's the core debate right now.
It pools at the very top, sitting in a server farm or inflating a stock portfolio while the displaced worker struggles to pay rent.
And that economic anxiety is not theoretical. It is actively boiling over into the physical labor market. Look at the industrial action currently paralyzing the meatpacking industry.
Oh, this is a huge story.
3,800 workers are currently on strike at a massive JBS meatpacking facility in Greeley, Colorado.
The historical context here is critical. The workers at this facility have not initiated a strike of this magnitude in 40 years.
4 decades.
These are the people working the kill floors and the processing lines. They're demanding fundamentally better wages and, crucially, improved safety conditions in an environment that exacts a brutal physical toll on the human body.
The friction here is the direct collision between algorithmic supply chain optimization and human biological limits. The corporate models dictate a specific speed for the processing line to maximize profit margins.
And the humans just have to keep up.
Right. But the human beings standing on that line suffer repetitive strain injuries, lacerations, and systemic fatigue to meet those algorithmic targets. Furthermore, the consolidation of the agricultural industry means this single strike in Colorado actively threatens the integrity of the entire United States beef supply chain.
So you have tech workers being laid off via automated emails, and meatpackers walking off the job because the physical extraction of their labor has become unbearable. When everyday people feel squeezed by the invisible mechanisms of the economy, that pressure does not simply dissipate.
No, it metabolizes.
It transforms into political theater, extreme polarization, and institutional collapse.
Absolutely. When economic and technological anxieties spike, the institutions designed to maintain civil order governments, universities, border agencies endure extreme stress testing. And we are seeing these structures fracture globally.
Let's talk about France.
The situation unfolding in France is a textbook example of political rhetoric devolving into physical street violence.
A severe national political crisis has erupted following the death of Quentin Durant, a 23-year-old activist affiliated with the New Right movement. According to the police reports and eyewitness accounts, he died following a brutal street brawl in the city of Lyon.
And to remain entirely impartial here, the sociology of this violence is what's truly alarming. The physical clash occurred between New Right activists and groups identifying as anti-fascist or Antifa.
Right.
What escalated this tragedy from a localized homicide into a crisis threatening the national government is the political affiliation of the suspects.
Who are they linked to?
The individuals arrested are reportedly linked to the New Left Party, La France Insoumise, the LFI, which is led by Jean-Luc Mélenchon.
We are watching the state's monopoly on violence begin to slip. The political discourse in France has become so highly polarized that factions on both the right and the left view each other not as political opponents, but as existential threats.
Which is incredibly dangerous.
When dialogue is entirely replaced by accusations of fascism or violent extremism, the mechanisms of democracy break down and the debate is settled with fists and weapons in the street.
The exact same ideological friction, this struggle to maintain a shared reality without resorting to suppression, is currently tearing through the American higher education system as well.
Yes, down to Florida.
The University of Florida, a massive public institution, has taken the unprecedented step of completely deactivating its campus chapter of the College Republicans.
And the administration's rationale centers on institutional safety and Title VI obligations. The decision followed multiple reports alleging anti-Semitic behavior and rhetoric stemming from individuals associated with the conservative group. The university effectively declared a zero-tolerance policy, arguing that maintaining a safe, non-hostile environment for its Jewish students necessitated shutting down the organization entirely.
And the resulting backlash perfectly illustrates the impossible tightrope these institutions are walking. Proponents of the deactivation argue that hate speech intrinsically threatens the physical and psychological safety of the student body and cannot be shielded by academic freedom.
Right, that's one side of the coin.
Conversely, a massive coalition of civil liberties advocates and conservative politicians argue that unilaterally deactivating a primary political organization is a draconian violation of First Amendment free speech rights.
They see it as suppression.
Exactly. They view it as an institution panicking under social pressure, opting for outright suppression rather than navigating the complex jurisprudence of protected speech.
When the bureaucratic systems inside our borders fail to handle nuance, it is no surprise that the physical borders themselves are becoming sites of tragedy and just rigid enforcement. Consider the heartbreaking reality of Mohammad Nazir Paktiawal.
This is a devastating story.
He was a 41-year-old Afghan asylum seeker.
And the context of his arrival is vital. He did not simply arrive unannounced. He was an ally who fought alongside United States military forces during the conflict in Afghanistan.
He risked his life.
He risked his life for American tactical interest, presumably with the implicit promise of safety.
And his reward was dying in the custody of U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or IC. The granular details of his final hours highlight the blind, unfeeling nature of bureaucracy. I mean, he was actively participating in civilian life, detained by agents mere hours after dropping his children off at school.
Just a normal morning.
Right. And then he experienced a severe, rapid health crisis while in the detention facility and died shortly thereafter.
Advocates are demanding a comprehensive federal investigation into the medical protocols and response times within the ICE facility. They point to the profound moral failure of a system that allows a combat ally to perish in a holding cell.
And what is the agency's response?
Well, the agency, in its bureaucratic defense, noted that Paktiawal had previously faced charges related to food benefits fraud, using a minor administrative infraction to justify the detention.
It is the ultimate administrative friction. A man's entire complex history, his combat service, his role as a father, is flattened by an algorithm or a bureaucratic checklist into a single binary classification: deportable.
And across the globe, nations are completely abandoning complex immigration processing in favor of physical barriers. In South America, Chile's newly elected far-right president, José Antonio Cast, has initiated concrete plans to construct a massive physical border barrier along the country's northern frontier.
Building a wall through the Atacama Desert and the foothills of the Andes is a logistical nightmare, but the policy objective is purely about physical exclusion. The bureaucratic systems designed to process asylum claims and manage undocumented migration are so thoroughly overwhelmed that the state is reverting to medieval architecture. Hard physical lines are replacing administrative procedure.
And while these institutions, from the university campus to the international border, are buckling under the weight of these life and death stakes, the political leadership tasked with managing the crisis is frequently engaging in behavior that feels entirely untethered from reality.
It's surreal.
The breakdown of basic decorum at the highest levels of power is staggering. Let's analyze the press conference that took place at the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C.
The setting is a crucial element of the dissonance here. You have the Kennedy Center, which is an institution dedicated to the performing arts, culture, and high society. U.S. President Donald Trump was holding a press availability there, flanked by prominent politicians. And during the course of standard political banter, he casually revealed to the press corps that a specific Florida Republican congressman has a terminal medical diagnosis, stating bluntly that the man would be, quote, dead by June.
And if you watch the footage, the physical reaction of the people around him tells the entire story. House Speaker Mike Johnson was standing directly adjacent to the podium, and his face registered profound, visible shock.
You could see it instantly.
He clearly had no prior briefing that this deeply personal, tragic medical information was going to be broadcast to the world.
It represents the complete evaporation of the boundaries between private human suffering and public political leverage. The terminal illness of a colleague was not treated with solemnity or privacy. It was weaponized, or perhaps just carelessly blurted out, as a piece of casual trivia to dominate the news cycle.
Right.
It forces political scientists to question how a system can function when the baseline agreements of ethical behavior and interpersonal trust are non-existent.
And that total disregard for shared reality is the exact friction driving a massive legal battle across the Atlantic. The ontology of truth itself, how we define what actually happened, is being litigated in a federal court in Florida.
The BBC lawsuit.
Yes, the British Broadcasting Corporation, the BBC, is currently petitioning the judge to outright dismiss a staggering $10 billion defamation lawsuit filed against them by Donald Trump.
And the mechanics of defamation law are highly specific, especially regarding public figures. The lawsuit centers entirely on a BBC Panorama documentary titled Trump, A Second Chance.
What is the core allegation?
Well, the legal complaint alleges that the BBC maliciously altered the historical record by selectively editing excerpts from his January 6th rally speech. The core argument from his team is that by omitting his specific auditory request for the crowd to protest peacefully, the documentary fundamentally misrepresented his intent, painting him purely as an inciter of violence to damage his political prospects.
And the BBC's defense strategy is a fascinating look at international media law, because they are fighting on two distinct fronts.
Tell me about the first front.
First, they are arguing a jurisdictional defense. They claim that because the documentary was produced in the UK and not officially broadcast by the BBC within the United States, the Florida federal court lacks the standing to even hear the case.
Okay, that makes sense. And the second front?
The second front addresses the actual standard of defamation. To win a defamation suit as a public figure under U.S. law, specifically the precedent set by New York Times v. Sullivan, the plaintiff must prove actual malice.
Meaning they knew it was false.
They must prove the network knew the information was false or acted with reckless disregard for the truth. The BBC impartially argues that their editorial choices accurately reflected the broader, factual context of the day's events, and that condensing a multi-hour speech into a documentary format is standard journalistic practice, not malicious fabrication.
So you have the media apparatus, the federal judiciary, and a sitting U.S. president locked in a $10 billion war over the definition of context.
Exactly.
If the domestic systems designed to establish truth and maintain order are struggling this profoundly, it is entirely predictable that the international stage has completely caught fire. The friction we've tracked from space to the economy to the courts finds its ultimate, most destructive expression in the global geopolitical powder keg.
Because war is the ultimate manifestation of systemic collapse. When diplomacy, trade, and deterrence fail, nations resort to kinetic violence to reorder the system.
Right?
Right now, the rapidly escalating conflict in the Middle East, specifically the triangle involving the United States, Israel, and Iran, is actively rewiring the global economy and testing the limits of military alliances. We are currently entering the third week of this specific hyperkinetic phase.
And the tactical developments on the battlefield are moving at blinding speed. The strategy clearly points toward decapitation strikes. Intelligence reports confirm that Israeli forces have successfully assassinated two deeply entrenched Iranian figures.
Who are the targets?
The targets were Ali Larijani, the national security chief of Iran, and Gholam Reza Soleimani, a top-tier commander within the Basij militia forces.
The intelligence apparatus required to execute those strikes is monumental. You have to penetrate the secure communications of a hostile state, track the physical movements of high-value targets in real time, and deliver a precision munition without triggering a broader early warning system.
It's incredibly complex.
But the strategic cost of these assassinations is a guaranteed, symmetrical escalation. We are seeing fresh, devastating Israeli military strikes expanding deep into towns in southern Lebanon, targeting proxy infrastructure.
And the retaliation is hitting American assets directly. The United States Embassy, situated in the heavily fortified Green Zone in Baghdad, Iraq, was recently struck by a coordinated drone attack. In response to this regional volatility, the U.S. military has escalated its posture dramatically, deploying F-15E Strike Eagles to the theater under the banner of Operation Epic Fury.
The F-15E is a terrifying piece of aerospace engineering. It is a dual-role fighter designed for both air-to-air dogfighting and deep interdiction air-to-ground bombing.
It's incredibly fast, isn't it?
It is capable of flying at Mach 2.5, 2.5 times the speed of sound, while carrying a massive payload of precision-guided munitions. The deployment is a clear projection of overwhelming kinetic force designed to deter further proxy attacks.
But the deployment of overwhelming force abroad is generating severe, visible friction within the internal apparatus of the U.S. government. The consensus on the war effort is fracturing. Joe Kent, the director of the National Counterterrorism Center, has submitted his resignation.
The resignation itself is significant. But the manner in which he departed is unprecedented.
How so?
A sitting intelligence director publicly airing grievances is incredibly rare. He explicitly and publicly blamed the Israeli government for applying undue diplomatic and strategic pressure, effectively dragging the United States into an unnecessary and highly dangerous direct confrontation with Iran.
And the rhetoric emanating from other cabinet officials is drawing immediate global legal scrutiny. The U.S. Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, is currently facing accusations from international law experts and domestic senators of casually promoting war crimes.
And this stems from a very specific phrase he used.
Yes, the controversy stems from his public statement declaring that, quote, no quarter will be given to Iranian forces.
In the strict lexicon of military law, no quarter is not just a metaphor for fighting hard. Under Article 40 of Additional Protocol 9 to the Geneva Conventions, declaring that no quarter will be given is explicitly defined as a war crime.
It has a very real legal definition.
It legally implies an order to execute surrendering enemy combatants, rather than taking them as prisoners of war. Using that specific phrase on a public platform undermines the entire legal framework the U.S. military relies upon.
Amidst all this strategic chaos, the political rumor mill is operating in overdrive. Multiple sources are reporting severe buyer's remorse infecting the inner circle of the Trump administration. There is a growing, palpable fear that the executive branch has become overconfident in purely military solutions, underestimating the quagmire of a regional Middle Eastern war.
The White House press office vehemently denies any internal fractures, projecting absolute unity. However, the human toll on the administration's staff is becoming visible. White House Chief of Staff Susie Wiles recently disclosed that she has been diagnosed with early-stage breast cancer.
It is a profound human element layered over the geopolitical crisis. She has stated her intention to stay on the job and continue her incredibly demanding duties while simultaneously undergoing medical treatment.
Right.
The sheer psychological and physical pressure of managing a global war while fighting a personal battle against cancer is difficult to comprehend.
And the pressure radiating from this conflict does not stop at the Oval Office. It is flowing directly into the global economic arteries. This is where the tactical military movements directly impact the listener.
Okay, let's tie this back.
The Strait of Hormuz is the most critical maritime choke point on the planet for the transport of crude oil. Due to the kinetic activity, it is effectively paralyzed.
Let's look at the mathematics of this paralysis because it perfectly illustrates how geopolitical friction drains your bank account. To move a massive cargo vessel through that narrow 21-mile-wide strait, shipping companies must purchase war-risk marine insurance. Before the escalation, the premium for a single voyage was roughly $40,000. Today, the insurance syndicates in London are demanding between $600,000 and $1.2 million per ship.
Because the insurance underwriters are calculating the exact probability of a multi-million-dollar vessel being struck by an anti-ship missile or a loitering munition. That astronomical spike in overhead cost doesn't just evaporate. The shipping conglomerates pass it directly down the supply chain.
The consumer pays for it.
The immediate result is that global crude oil prices have surged past $100 a barrel.
Think about what happens when you start your car to drive to the grocery store. The gasoline in your tank costs more. U.S. gas prices have hit their highest point since October 2023. The diesel fuel powering the truck that delivered the groceries costs more. The electricity keeping refrigeration units humming costs more.
It's a domino effect.
We are witnessing entire nations entering a phase of energy triage where governments must actively mandate conservation and curb industrial power usage simply to survive the macroeconomic shock.
And here is where I struggle with the logic of modern statecraft.
What do you mean?
We spent the first half of this deep dive marveling at technological supremacy. We have AI managing cities. We have F-15E Strike Eagles pulling G-forces at 2.5 times the speed of sound. We have satellites reading the chemical makeup of planets light years away. We possess the most advanced lethal technology in the history of the universe.
Right.
Yet, all of that power is effectively useless if we cannot escort a slow-moving physical cargo ship through a narrow stretch of water without submitting to $1 million insurance extortion.
That exact paradox is currently tearing diplomatic alliances apart. President Trump has forcefully demanded that European and NATO allies deploy their naval assets to help the U.S. secure the Strait of Hormuz and guarantee the flow of global commerce.
But the allies are looking at the math and flatly refusing the request. Germany's leader, Friedrich Merz, publicly rebuffed the demand, arguing the strict geographic limitations of the alliance, stating this operational theater is simply not a NATO concern.
And the UK.
The UK's Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, similarly refused to commit British naval forces, deeply wary of domestic political backlash and the risk of being dragged into a generational conflict.
The refusal exposes the deep fractures within the European project itself. Josep Borrell, the former foreign policy chief for the European Union, have gone on the offensive. He publicly stated that the EU is rapidly losing its credibility and diplomatic leverage on the global stage.
Who did he blame?
He pointed the finger directly at the current president of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, accusing her of maintaining a stance that is blindly biased toward U.S. and Israeli interests, actively sacrificing European economic stability, meaning cheap energy in the process.
The diplomatic friction is even alienating massive potential partners in the East. Look at India's position. India's economy is ravenous for energy and is highly dependent on oil shipments passing safely through Hormuz. They desperately need maritime cooperation.
Right.
Yet, at this exact moment of crisis, the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom, the USCRF, issued a report recommending severe sanctions against India's primary intelligence agency, the Research and Analysis Wing, known as RNAW, as well as the nationalist organization, the RSS.
And the sanctions are recommended over alleged severe religious freedom violations targeting minority populations within India. The Indian government immediately slammed the report as a biased, politically motivated intrusion into their sovereign affairs.
The timing is a masterclass in diplomatic dysfunction. You have elements of the U.S. government actively alienating a crucial regional superpower at the exact moment the U.S. military requires logistical and diplomatic support to stabilize a maritime choke point.
We can analyze the insurance premiums and the diplomatic cables all day, but we cannot lose sight of the ultimate human toll. The breakdown of these massive logistical systems translates directly into starvation.
It's a grim reality.
The United Nations World Food Program, the WFP, has issued a horrifying analysis. Because shipping costs have exploded and maritime supply lines are severed, an estimated 45 million additional people globally have been pushed to the brink of acute hunger.
The logistics of basic human survival are failing under the friction. In the Gaza Strip, humanitarian organizations calculate that a minimum of 600 aid trucks per day are required simply to maintain baseline caloric survival for the population. Due to the ongoing military operations and border restrictions, only about 200 trucks are successfully making the crossing.
And the famine conditions in Sudan are almost beyond comprehension. The ongoing internal conflict, compounded by these global supply chain breakdowns, has left over 21 million people facing active starvation.
It's heartbreaking.
A drone strike in Baghdad and a closed strait in Hormuz don't stay in the Middle East. The ripples travel outward until they remove the final plate of food from a refugee in Sudan.
It is incredibly heavy. The sheer weight of understanding how these systems break can feel paralyzing.
It really can.
And historically, when the reality of the physical world feels this fraught, humanity has always deployed a specific coping mechanism. We turn to storytelling, to the structure of sports, and to cultural escapism to process the chaos we cannot control.
Right. Let's examine how our culture is acting as a mirror for these exact anxieties.
Art is the ultimate diagnostic tool for the collective subconscious. It does not exist in a vacuum. The results of the 2026 Academy Awards provide a perfect encapsulation of the current global mood.
The premier award, Best Picture, went to the film One Battle After Another, which defeated the heavily favored Sinners.
The consensus among cultural analysts is that One Battle After Another secured the victory precisely because its complex, morally ambiguous political themes resonated so deeply with an academy and really an audience exhausted by real-world conflict.
You see a deep craving for unvarnished authenticity reflected in the acting categories as well. Jessie Buckley delivered a raw performance to win Best Actress. Michael B. Jordan captured Best Actor, notably beating out ubiquitous, highly manicured stars like Timothée Chalamet.
And perhaps most tellingly, Sean Penn won a major award despite refusing to run any form of public relations campaign. The voting body actively rejected manufactured, algorithmic PR in favor of messy, human reality.
We are demanding complexity from our escapism because the real world has lost its moral clarity. The showrunners for the upcoming television series, Star Trek, Starfleet Academy gave an interview that perfectly diagnoses this shift.
What do they say?
They noted that modern audiences completely reject the cartoonish, mustache-twirling antagonists of the past. To write a compelling antagonist today, the writers stated that, quote, villains are the heroes of their own movie.
That sentiment maps flawlessly onto the geopolitical segment we just unpacked. If you analyze the motivations of the United States, Israel, Iran, or the clashing political factions on the streets of France, you will not find a single participant who believes they are the villain.
No, of course not.
Every single faction operates under a deeply held, internalized narrative where their violence is justified, defensive, and ultimately heroic.
And if television is reflecting our geopolitical friction, the world of professional sports is currently serving as a live-action stress test for the exact technological friction we discussed regarding AI.
Baseball.
Yes. Next week, Major League Baseball, the MLB, is taking a historic step. They are officially introducing robot umpires, automated computer vision systems, to call balls and strikes during official games.
The technology, likely a variation of the Hawkeye system used in tennis, uses high-speed cameras to map the exact three-dimensional geometry of the strike zone over home plate. It removes the human umpire's subjective interpretation of where the ball crossed the plane.
The timing of this implementation is unbelievable because the baseball world is currently reeling from the chaos of human error. Just days ago, during the World Baseball Classic, the WBC, the heavily favored team from the Dominican Republic was eliminated from the tournament by Team USA.
And it came down to one call.
The deciding factor was a highly controversial, human-called third strike on a pitch that appeared, to millions of viewers, to be completely out of the strike zone. An entire nation's championship hopes were erased by a momentary lapse in human optical processing.
So the league's solution is to eradicate the human flaw. But this raises the identical philosophical question we asked when Hong Kong handed its civic bureaucracy over to a network of AI agents.
Exactly. Does an algorithmic umpire understand the context, the mounting pressure of the inning, or the unwritten spirit of the game? Or does it simply execute the math?
That is the core anxiety. The game of baseball has always involved a subtle human negotiation. The pitcher, the catcher, and the umpire are constantly engaged in a psychological dance to establish the boundaries of the strike zone on any given night.
When we replace that flawed, beautiful human negotiation with cold algorithmic precision, what happens? Does the game lose its soul? When we optimize the humanity out of the system, what is left?
The institutions governing sports are desperately trying to enforce order, even as the fundamental nature of the games changes. In European soccer, Chelsea Football Club, Chelsea FC, was just struck with a massive disciplinary action by the Premier League.
What happened there?
They were handed a record £10.75 million financial penalty and a suspended transfer ban. The financial forensics revealed that the club had been utilizing a complex network of hidden payments to circumvent the league's profit and sustainability rules when signing players.
It is another example of an institution trying to maintain the illusion of a level playing field against the immense friction of capital.
I think we have reached the point in the deep dive where everyone, including me, desperately needs a palate cleanser.
I am right there with you.
Fortunately, reality occasionally provides moments of sheer, absurd comedy. King Charles, the reigning monarch of the United Kingdom, was recently conducting a royal visit to an arts venue in Manchester. And in a moment that defies all historical precedent, he actually stepped behind the DJ decks.
Wow, I actually have to laugh at that mental image.
The visual juxtaposition is phenomenal. You have the ultimate symbol of ancient or rigid institutional tradition attempting to physically operate the machinery of contemporary club culture.
He has the royal attire on, he's got one headphone pressed to his ear, he's crossfading a beat, and he casually tells the crowd he's, quote, trying to get a hang of it. It is a spectacular, deeply human attempt to remain relevant and bridge the gap between a dying era and the modern zeitgeist.
It is the exact comedic relief the timeline needed today.
And if we're looking for consistency in an unpredictable world, we can always look to the shores of Malibu. Alexandra Paul, the actress most famous for her role on the television series Baywatch, was arrested once again this week.
Let me guess.
The chickens.
Yes. She was detained by law enforcement for physically intercepting a transport truck and freeing the chickens inside as part of an organized animal rights protest.
Say what you will about the legality of the tactic, the woman possesses absolute, unyielding commitment to her cause.
There is something almost comforting about that level of persistence amidst the global chaos. So take a breath and look back at the massive, sprawling terrain we have mapped out today. We started by looking at a cereal box-sized satellite, trying to deduce if the violent magnetic flares of distant stars are preventing life from taking hold.
We visited a newly discovered planet choked by hydrogen sulfide. We tracked the expansion of the universe itself through a 10-billion-year-old supernova.
We examined the physics of the sky shattering over Tennessee and floodwaters erasing national borders in Africa.
We analyzed the trillion-dollar physical infrastructure being built to house artificial intelligence and the tragic irony of human workers being laid off by the very algorithms their tax dollars subsidized.
We saw institutions fracturing under the weight of political polarization in France and on American college campuses. We mapped the lethal high-speed geometry of a regional war in the Middle East and calculated the grim mathematics of how a $1 million insurance premium directly starves a refugee in Sudan.
And we ended by looking in the cultural mirror, seeing our own anxieties reflected in the Oscars, in the moral complexity of Star Trek, and in the algorithmic strike zones of a baseball game.
Look closely at everything we've unpacked today. Whether it is a global maritime supply chain moving fuel across the ocean, a military alliance like NATO, an electrical grid groaning under the weight of AI servers, or just the agreed-upon dimensions of a strike zone on a dirt field, these are all fundamentally just agreements.
Right.
They are invisible, conceptual systems that we all simply agree to believe in and participate in. But the physics of friction we explored today proves that systems only hold up as long as the people inside them refuse to let them break. As artificial intelligence increasingly takes over the management of our power grids, our financial markets, and our civic bureaucracies, the pressing question is no longer whether the machines will function efficiently.
What's the real question then?
The vital question is, when the underlying human agreements inevitably break down, will the algorithms know how to put us back together?
That is the exact thought I want to leave you with today. Look at the friction in your own daily life. Examine the agreements, both spoken and unspoken, that keep your personal and professional systems running. Notice what happens when you push them past their limits. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the physical and digital world around you. Keep looking for the hidden mechanics driving the headlines, and we will catch you next time.
For enjoying Artificially Informed.
Hit subscribe and share it with a friend.
From the left, the right, and straight from the algorithm.
Thank you.
Welcome to the debate. You know, when you look at a massive, intricate piece of architecture, like a skyscraper, for instance, most people, well, they just look at the glass facade.
Right? The surface level aesthetics.
Exactly. But structural engineers, they look for the load-bearing walls. They look for that one core pillar that holds the entire weight of the building.
Because you can remodel the lobby, you can change the windows.
Yeah, you can even switch out the tenants entirely. But if you remove that central pillar, I mean, the whole building comes down.
But what happens when that pillar starts showing deep structural stress fractures? And what if the tenants decide they would rather build their own separate houses instead of waiting for the ceiling to cave in?
So the big question we're tackling today revolves around that exact architectural metaphor, just applied on a planetary scale. We are looking at a true geopolitical inflection point right now.
A massive one.
The escalating conflict involving the U.S., Israel, and Iran is now grinding into its third week. And this is no longer merely a regional dispute in the Middle East. It is a global shockwave. I mean, oil is surging above $100 a barrel, and the critical Strait of Hormuz has been rendered effectively impassable.
And it's the absolute primary artery for a huge percentage of the world's energy supply.
Exactly. And the international response to this paralysis is what we really need to dissect today. We've been looking at a flood of recent market data, diplomatic cables, economic analyses detailing the fallout across Europe, Asia, Latin America, the Middle East.
It is a completely planetary event.
It is. So the central question of our discourse is this. Does the current geopolitical crisis and the international response to the paralysis of the Strait of Hormuz signify the definitive end of unipolar American hegemony and the rapid emergence of a multipolar world order?
Or does the ensuing market chaos actually demonstrate the enduring, irreplaceable role of U.S. military and economic architecture in maintaining global stability? It is really the defining question of our era.
It absolutely is. And I'm taking the stance today that this crisis explicitly highlights the irreplaceable necessity of U.S. dominance. I argue that without American security architecture, global trade and market stability collapse entirely.
And I represent the contrasting perspective. I argue that this crisis exposes the terminal decline of U.S. hegemony. We are watching European allies actively rebel against Washington's directives, while regional powers successfully build alternative geopolitical frameworks right under our noses.
Well, let me begin by establishing why the current crisis validates the absolute necessity of a U.S.-led global order. And it really comes down to the sheer mechanism of how global trade actually functions. We have to look at the immediate mathematical reality of the Strait of Hormuz being paralyzed.
The insurance numbers, you mean?
Yes, exactly. If you look at the recent numbers out of Lloyd's of London, war risk premiums for shipping have skyrocketed from their standard 0.02% to a staggering 1%.
Which is just an astronomical jump for any shipping firm.
It's unprecedented. For anyone listening who isn't a maritime shipping expert, let me break down what that actually means. People think navies control the oceans, but it's actually actuaries in London. If the insurance markets decide a waterway is too dangerous, the ships literally do not sail.
Right.
We are talking about turning a standard $40,000 insurance cost into a $1.2 million liability for a single tanker voyage. The market cannot absorb that kind of friction. The global economy demands a guarantor of safe passage.
But the U.S. hasn't been able to guarantee that safe passage, have they?
Well, right now we see the deployment of thousands of U.S. Marines and sailors on warships moving toward the Middle East via the Malacca Strait. Only the United States possesses the blue water naval power to handle this. I mean, the logistical capacity to project stabilizing force across open oceans globally, not just defend their own coastlines.
I hear you.
Plus, despite the oil spikes, U.S. markets, the S&P 500, the Dow, the NASDAQ, they are rebounding. It's based on domestic Federal Reserve cues and massive tech resilience, like the $27 billion Nebius Meta AI deal. It proves the global economy remains tethered to American financial gravity. When the waters get rough, the world still fundamentally relies on the safety of U.S. structural architecture.
Well, I come at it from a different way. I think the world is no longer relying on U.S. architecture. They're actively building lifeboats to escape it. We have already transitioned into a multipolar reality where Washington's directives are increasingly ignored or, just completely bypassed.
Bypassed entirely?
Yes, bypassed entirely. Look at the diplomatic rebellion from traditional Western allies. European leaders, specifically the UK's Keir Starmer and Germany's Friedrich Merz, have outright rejected demands from former President Trump to form a NATO coalition to secure the Strait of Hormuz.
True, they have been very hesitant.
More than hesitant, Germany has explicitly stated the Iran conflict is not a NATO concern. But it goes far beyond Europe. The global south is actively routing around these Western choke points. Russia is developing alternative shipping routes. India is navigating demands to return seized tankers by directly negotiating with Tehran for safe passage.
Completely bypassing the U.S. security umbrella.
Exactly. And China's Xi Jinping is accelerating a Belt and Road port alliance precisely to capitalize on the Iran war. So the resilience you see isn't the triumph of unipolarity. It is the chaotic, real-time construction of a world engineered entirely outside of Washington's control.
Okay, let's follow that logic, because Europe pulling back is a fascinating dynamic. You mentioned this coalition of the unwilling, the profound disagreement between the U.S. and its traditional European allies regarding military intervention in the Middle East.
It is a fatal crack in Western alliances. We aren't just seeing a polite policy disagreement. We're seeing a near-universal refusal by European leaders to engage.
But is that a structural shift or just short-term politics?
It's structural. When the EU's top diplomat, Joseph Borrell, publicly warns that the European Union is losing credibility by aligning too closely with U.S. and Israeli actions, that is a massive paradigm shift. Borrell is essentially arguing that allowing the U.S. to act unilaterally harms European interests, particularly regarding high energy prices. They are drawing a line in the sand.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective. Europe's hesitance is not some grand declaration of geopolitical independence. What we are witnessing is the classic free rider problem on a macro scale.
Free riding? How so?
Think back to our load-bearing wall metaphor. Europe is like a tenant on the fourth floor who refuses to pay for the building's security system.
They know full well that the landlord, the United States, lives on the ground floor and is going to secure the perimeter anyway because the global flow of oil demands it.
So you think it's just performative?
Totally performative. They can afford to take a moral high ground and claim strategic autonomy precisely because they know the U.S. Navy is going to patrol the waters regardless.
That's a compelling argument, but have you considered the structural finality of their rhetoric? Starmer and Merz aren't just saying, we'll sit this one out because you've got it covered. They are actively redefining the boundaries of NATO.
By limiting its scope, you mean?
Yes, by explicitly stating that the Iran conflict is not a NATO concern, they are geographically and strategically capping the alliance. They are telling Washington that American foreign policy in the Middle East is an American problem, not a Western one. That is not free riding. That is a conscious decoupling of strategic interests.
It's definitely a distancing maneuver.
They are looking at the potential for Iranian retaliation, which has already driven up energy costs across Europe, and deciding that the U.S. security umbrella is actually functioning like a lightning rod. It draws the fire.
A lightning rod that is currently shielding them from a total collapse of their energy grids, frankly. Look, yes, they are risk-averse. European leaders are terrified of the domestic political fallout of higher fuel prices and potential retaliatory strikes.
Which is a valid fear for any leader.
Absolutely. But risk aversion in the face of Iranian threats does not equal a new independent European security architecture. Where is the European Blue Water Navy capable of securing the Mediterranean, let alone the Persian Gulf? It doesn't exist.
Well, they don't have one, no.
Right. They're relying on diplomatic distance while quietly depending on the physical deployment of those U.S. Marines and advanced assets like the F-15E Strike Eagles.
But you are assuming that physical military dominance is the only way to secure these routes. And that brings us perfectly to how non-Western nations are responding. If Europe won't help secure the existing routes militarily, the Global South is proving that you can survive a supply chain shock through alternative economic infrastructure and regional diplomacy.
Wait, let me make sure I understand this. You're talking about bypassing the physical choke points entirely?
Exactly. We need to move the discourse from military alliances to economic infrastructure. Look at the proactive maneuvers of the BRICS nations right now. India is the prime example here. They are operating completely independently of the U.S. by directly negotiating safe passage with Tehran.
Just bilateral talks.
Right. They are navigating the complex demands regarding seized tankers through bilateral diplomacy, not through the threat of aircraft carriers.
I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning, because bilateral diplomacy only works until a state or non-state actor decides to ignore it. Diplomacy on paper doesn't shoot down an inbound drone.
But they aren't ignoring it. The recent geopolitical data shows that diplomatic discussions have proven effective in allowing specific tankers through. And look at the macro infrastructure level. Xi Jinping is capitalizing on the paralysis of Hormuz and the ongoing disputes at the Panama Canal to push a massive Belt and Road International Port Alliance.
Which is a long-term play.
It is, but it's happening now. Russia is actively developing and testing alternative northern shipping routes. Even Germany, despite deep ideological differences, is turning back to China for economic collaboration right now. They are prioritizing economic reality over Western alignment.
Because they need the trade flow.
Yes, the world is realizing that a single shipping choke point policed by a single hegemon is a point of catastrophic failure. So they are decentralizing global trade.
That is a fascinating theoretical framework, but let's look at the immediate mechanistic reality of today. You are talking about alternative ports and trade routes that are drawn on paper or are years away from handling the sheer volume of the Strait of Hormuz.
They are scaling up faster than you'd think.
Maybe, but right now, today, the UAE is having to close and reopen its airspace to intercept immediate missile and drone threats from Iran. Iran is escalating its rhetoric, warning it will take the conflict as far as necessary. When a ballistic missile is detected, a Belt and Road Port Alliance does not intercept it.
You are dismissing the diplomacy too quickly.
I'm not dismissing it, but I am emphasizing the actual mechanism of global trade. I go back to the actuaries in London. The global shipping insurance market, which dictates whether a vessel actually leaves port, does not care about a bilateral handshake agreement between New Delhi and Tehran.
They care about the bottom line.
They care about physical, kinetic risk. That is exactly why those war risk premiums surge to 1%. The only thing that lowers that premium, the only tangible asset that shipping companies are desperate for right now, is a U.S. naval escort. The architecture of global logistics fundamentally relies on the kinetic ability to guarantee safe transit. The BRICS nations simply cannot provide that in the Gulf.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why. The U.S. naval escorts haven't solved the problem. Reading the latest market analysis, despite U.S. naval escorts attempting to secure the waterway, shipping companies are still treating the strait as a high-risk area, and the waterway remains paralyzed.
Well, it's a heavily contested zone.
Exactly. The military intervention isn't fixing the market, it's exacerbating the tension. The very presence of the U.S. military is exactly what Iran is responding to. When India negotiates directly, they are acknowledging a fundamental truth. The U.S. presence is part of the friction, not the lubricant.
That's an interesting point, though I would frame it differently. The friction exists because of Iran's decentralized military strategy and their use of underground arsenals to threaten their neighbors and hold global shipping hostage.
But the U.S. presence...
The U.S. presence is a containment mechanism. And honestly, if we want to look at whether the U.S. system is failing or holding, we have to look at the macroeconomic picture. The planetary economic fallout paints a very clear picture of where the true power still resides.
You mean the insulation of Western corporations versus the devastating toll on developing nations?
I mean the sheer gravity of American capital. You might wonder what a tech deal in California has to do with oil tankers in the Middle East, but it's about where global capital feels safe. You would think that oil above $100 a barrel and a paralyzed major shipping lane would crash the American economy.
It certainly strains it.
Yet the data shows U.S. stock markets, the S&P 500, the Dow, the NASDAQ, rebounding and rallying based on domestic Federal Reserve cues. Look at the $27 billion Nebius infrastructure deal powered by NVIDIA and Meta that just went through. Capital is flowing massively into U.S.-led technological architecture because investors know American financial supremacy is largely undeterred by regional energy shocks.
Undeterred for who, though?
For the global market, when the world burns, money flees to the safety of the U.S. dollar and U.S. tech. The center is holding.
The center is holding for the top 1% of corporate entities, perhaps. But your argument masks profound, systemic vulnerabilities. You point to tech deals and stock market rallies, but look at the domestic contradictions we are seeing right now.
What kind of contradictions?
Well, U.S. politicians like Senator Elizabeth Warren are actively interrogating companies like Meta and Amazon over laying off thousands of workers despite receiving huge corporate tax perks. The stock market is rallying because these corporations are ruthless with their workforces to maintain profit margins, not because the underlying economy is immune to the shock.
But corporate restructuring is just a standard mechanism of market efficiency. It doesn't negate the macro resilience of the U.S. economy as an engine for global stability.
But it proves that the insulation you're talking about is an illusion for the actual working class. And if we zoom out to the planetary perspective, which is what we really must do, the geopolitical games of the global north are causing genuine, catastrophic humanitarian and economic crises in the global south.
I acknowledge the strain is global.
Look at Latin America. Look at Cuba. Right now, Cuba is suffering an island-wide blackout, a total national power grid collapse. Why? It is significantly exacerbated by the long-standing U.S. oil blockade, colliding with the current planetary energy triage caused by the Middle East conflict.
Cuba's domestic infrastructure failures are largely the result of its own internal centralized governance models over the last 60 years.
You cannot separate their internal infrastructure from the external reality of being cut off from global oil markets by U.S. policy, especially when global oil is over $100 a barrel because of a crisis the U.S. is involved in.
But that's a specific, localized policy.
The crisis has forced nations like Cuba to fundamentally alter their economic landscapes. I mean, they are now allowing foreign nationals to invest and own businesses just to survive the blockade. The point is this: the U.S. hegemon is using its economic and military architecture not to stabilize the planet, but to weaponize the supply chain.
That's a strong claim.
And the rest of the planet, The countries that don't have $27 billion to drop on AI infrastructure is suffering the consequences. The gravity you speak of is crushing the developing world.
I'm not blind to the collateral economic damage in developing nations. The rise in fertilizer prices alone, driven by these shipping disruptions, threatens global food security. It is a severe planetary concern. But let's follow the logic of your argument to its natural conclusion.
Okay, let's do that.
If the U.S. order is so destructive and the multipolar world is the brilliant solution, why is the multipolar world failing to step in and stabilize the energy markets right now? If China and Russia are the new co-architects of global stability, why aren't their alternative routes suppressing the price of oil?
Because transition takes time.
The reality is that the entire planet still operates on a system designed, maintained, and underwritten by American naval and financial power. When that power is challenged, as it is now, the whole system shudders. But that shudder doesn't prove the system is obsolete. It proves how heavily the world relies upon it.
It proves the system is fragile because it is unipolar. If a single conflict in the Gulf can send war risk premiums up by thousands of % and threaten global food security because fertilizer can't ship out of the Middle East, then the architecture is inherently flawed.
Every architecture has weak points.
A load-bearing wall shouldn't be that brittle. What we are seeing right now is the painful, chaotic transition period. Yes, the alternative infrastructure, the Belt and Road ports, the Russian northern shipping routes, the bilateral Indian negotiations, are in their infancy compared to a century of U.S. naval dominance.
Very much in their infancy.
But the trajectory is undeniable. The refusal of the EU to join the coalition, the UAE hadn't to independently manage its airspace defense, the global push to bypass the U.S.-controlled straits. This is the planet reacting to a unipolar order that no longer serves its collective interests.
You talk about a chaotic transition period as if it's just a bumpy road to a better destination. But historically, periods of multipolarity where competing regional hegemons vie for control without a central stabilizing force have been the most violent and economically volatile eras in human history.
I'm not saying it will be completely seamless.
The transition you casually mention could mean decades of disrupted supply chains, regional wars, and deep economic depression. The fact that U.S. tech firms can still command massive capital allocations and that the Federal Reserve still effectively dictates the baseline of global finance suggests the market fundamentally trusts the U.S. to weather this storm and maintain the system.
Trust? Or a lack of alternatives in the short term? You mentioned the Malacca Strait earlier, and the deployment of those massive warships. That is the ultimate symbol of your argument, force projection.
It's an essential capability.
But force projection is yielding diminishing returns. When the hegemon has to rely entirely on kinetic threat to maintain deterrence, the moral and strategic authority of that hegemon is already fractured. They are holding on to control through sheer force, while the diplomatic and economic realities slip through their fingers.
But the mechanism of deterrence requires the credible threat of overwhelming force. The U.S. is trying to maintain open sea lanes in a world where bad actors are actively trying to close them.
But they aren't open. That is the core reality of what we are discussing today. Despite the deployments, despite the rhetoric, the strait is paralyzed. The war risk premium is still 1%.
If the premium is high,
the U.S. military is there, and the market actuaries are still saying it's not safe. That is the definition of a failing security architecture.
It is paralyzed because the U.S. is currently exercising restraint, attempting to manage a contained regional conflict without igniting a third world war. The fact that the U.S. hasn't simply flattened the opposition to open the strait is a testament to the complexity of modern warfare, not a lack of capability.
That's certainly one interpretation.
If the U.S. were to withdraw entirely, as the multipolar advocates seem to desire, the resulting power vacuum would not be filled by peaceful Belt and Road trade agreements. It would be filled by immediate, unrestricted regional warfare. The U.S. presence is the only thing capping the escalation.
I come at it from a different way. The Global South sees the U.S. prioritizing its geopolitical rivalry with Iran over the economic stability of the developing world. It's causing blackouts in Havana and food insecurity in Africa. That is exactly why they are building those lifeboats.
Well, we've covered an immense amount of ground today. To bring this all together, let me summarize my position. This crisis has undoubtedly exposed profound frictions in the international system. However, the core stabilizers of the global economy, from the massive naval deployments securing the periphery, to the gravitational pull of the Federal Reserve, to the unmatched resilience of American capital and technology, they remain fundamentally anchored in U.S. power.
The foundation is still there, you argue?
Precisely. The shudder we feel in the global supply chain today is not the collapse of the American order. It is the friction of the system successfully absorbing and containing a massive geopolitical shock.
And to summarize my perspective, the ongoing paralysis of Hormuz, the explicit refusal of traditional European allies to follow U.S. military directives, and the proactive structural maneuvering of non-Western powers across Latin America, Asia, and the Middle East all prove that we have irreversibly entered a multipolar era.
A complete paradigm shift.
Exactly. The unipolar system is not absorbing the shock, it is fracturing under it. Regional powers are no longer waiting for Washington to solve their problems. They are actively charting their own sovereign courses, building new infrastructure and negotiating their own bilateral peace.
I think we can both acknowledge a shared understanding that the traditional system is under absolutely unprecedented stress, and that the economic ramifications, from tech layoffs in Silicon Valley to the collapse of power grids in Cuba, are genuinely planetary in scale.
We certainly agree on that. The divergence lies in whether this immense stress will ultimately shatter the U.S.-led order or merely force it to evolve into a new shape.
Exactly. There is far more to explore regarding how global supply chains and diplomacy will evolve in the coming months. We leave it to you, the listener, to weigh the evidence and form your own conclusions on the future of global power dynamics.
When you look closely at that structural core of the building, you have to ask yourself, is the building settling into a new foundation, or is it failing completely?
A question that will define the next decade of planetary history. Thank you for joining us on The Debate.
That's it for today's Artificially Informed.
Nope. Thanks for spending your time with us.
Yeah.
Stay sharp, stay curious. See you next time.